Hello everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to Whims, and today I'm going to give you my review for the Season 7 Episode 4 episode by the name of Plaything. And this episode is a very interesting one to unravel because to me this episode was good, and then on my second viewing I was kind of divided because this episode has a very interesting structure. So it's basically set in two very different timelines following the same character. So we follow a character by the name of Cameron Walker, who is a video game journalist, or he was a video game journalist, and we start off with him in the distant future, having shoplifted a particular piece of technology. And when the police catch up to him, they give him a little bit of a swab and they put his DNA up against something, and he's actually been, wanted for a very serious murder charge. So he gets brought in by the police, the local authorities, and he gets interrogated as potential murderer. And from there, he basically tells a story about back in the 1990s, 1994 to be exactly, which is the year of my birth, by the way. And he basically tells the story of how he got the opportunity to talk to the Colin Rittman on a new video game he was designing called the Thronglets. So when he goes to the company that produces this game, he gets the chance to interview Colin, but he also gets the chance to bear witness to a new form of technological programming, which is in the form of these things called the Thronglets. And what the Thronglets are is they're basically like, imagine Tamagotchis if they were self-aware and they had sentience and they could communicate with you. That's essentially what the Thronglets are. Well, actually, they're like a combination of Tamagotchis, Lemmings, and a couple of other things that you would know from video game history. And it's actually kind of funny when you really think about it that these digitised beings are essentially these very self-aware, very kind of almost sentient beings that have thoughts, feelings, and they have to be fed, looked after. And you're essentially looking after them in this very digitised environment, almost like you're playing a game of Sim City or The Sims or Lemmings or any other kind of, video game where it's meant to be like a sort of simulation for life almost. It's very kind of bizarre, but then what really makes this episode kind of interesting for me is it basically talks about the concept of what happens when you gain self-awareness. What happens when a particularly fictional or fictionalized construct develops self-awareness, and what will happen if you're able to communicate with that thing, and what will go from there. Because what is actually kind of very interesting is that Cameron basically sees this as just an ordinary assignment at first, but then he very slowly starts to become very well acquainted with these creatures. He looks after these creatures, he feeds them, he clothes them, he showers them. He does all these different things to make them feel happy and to feel wanted. And he treats them like extensions of himself, or extensions of like a pet almost. And it really does make it kind of sad because you do feel like Cameron is basically a character who's a very lonely person. He doesn't have anyone else in his life. His parents, don't really contact him all that much or see how he's doing. Because, of course, this is 1994. They didn't have, the internet or, FaceTiming back in those days. But what's very interesting is that he only has one other person in his life, a guy called Lump. And I like the fact that he's just this random guy who comes in and gets high with him, and he basically talks to him about all sorts of things. They play things like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat on the SNES whilst they're getting high on, weed or pot or whatever. And I really find that kind of hilarious. But also, Cameron in the future describes Lump as almost like a parasite where he drains everything out of people until there's nothing left. There's no agency, there's no degree of, talking back or any kind of degree of standing up for oneself. He just basically drains them dry. And I love how he describes this almost human being. He is a human being. It's almost like this very inhuman thing. And then he describes these Thronglets as these very almost humanoid creatures, even though they are completely digitised. And you're looking at them almost through a computer screen. And I really like that idea. But what really is kind of confusing to me is as time goes on, Cameron begins to... Because what really sets this whole entire chain of events off is he starts to get high on drugs with Lump, and he begins to, experiment with acid. He also experiments with all other different types of drugs, and he begins to feel like whenever he goes to the Thronglets, he feels like he's communicating with them in a sort of like their alien language. He's able to translate their alien language. And it's very weird because he says it's almost like doing a shopping list. So there's a list of things that I've got to do. I've got to, get these creatures so that I can communicate with them better. So he starts to deliberately go off work and take time off work. He does go to work, obviously, at times, but he also, the very thing that he's hired to do, which is write the review for this game, is no longer available because the person who actually made it, Colin Rittman, ends up going off the deep end and ends up going crazy or insane. And I thought that was very interesting because that was hinted at, that he has like a history of going off and like doing all these crazy, insane shit things. He's almost like the Russell Brand of video game designers, where he just basically goes off every once in a while and does something crazy, and it's like, oh, that's our Colin kind of doing this crazy stuff. But I actually kind of find it very interesting because it kind of makes me think to myself, was the events of Bandersnatch even remotely real? Because part of me feels like part of it was real, but like in the previous episode, or episode 2, Petite Noir, they explore the idea of different realities, different time zones, and there's different realities where different things have happened. Part of me feels like this is the scenario where Colin is the one who is having the Bandersnatch things happen to him instead of Stefan from that film. But if you want to know more about that film proper and my thoughts on it, I'll do a review later on down the line. But I feel like there's a little bit of a bleed through of both Bandersnatch and Plaything and how they both exist in the same universe. But they are also very similar in the sense that they do deal with the fact that you are almost like blending realities together, and you're losing your sense of reality, or you're using your sense of your sanity through the actual use of this particular piece of technology that they've got. And I really like that, and I like the fact that when he starts to really go off the rails, he begins to spill out all of his paycheck. I was about to say something else, but he's about to literally spill all of his paycheck on these different devices. Like he gets a Macintosh computer. He also gets several decades go on, and he gets something like PS2, PS3, PS5, and he gets all these different games consoles. And I thought, he's not going to work, so how the hell is he getting the money to pay for this stuff? And it's one of those funny things. But then when you get to the main storyline in sort of the futuristic present day tense, he's found a way of communicating with the Thronglets to a degree where he can actually allow them to break into other systems and actually influence human nature to the degree where they can actually possess humans and actually take them over to a certain degree. And it kind of ends in a very it ends in a cliffhanger, but it doesn't end in a very satisfying cliffhanger, because usually even the most thought out episodes, even the most thought out films and TV show moments have a very cohesive ending, or have a sense of, we know roughly what's going on, to the point where we can actually guess what's going to happen following that scene. It doesn't just simply say that, oh yeah, this bombshell's happened, and then all of a sudden it leaves a sort of cliffhanger when everyone starts to glitch out almost at this police station, and then they just drop to the floor and potentially die whilst the Thronglets take them over. They don't just stop it right there when you're supposed to know how it's going to happen. And part of me feels like Charlie Brooker gave up at this moment. I don't want to say that he gave up, but part of me feels like he didn't really think the overall outcome through to the point where it was, or if he did, it was probably going into cliche or unoriginal territory. So he probably just thought, oh, just leave it on this cliffhanger and have the audience decide, because ambiguous endings are good too, right? But at least with ambiguous endings, the really good ones really do leave you with a sense of, you still know roughly how it works and how things happen throughout the story, to the point where the ambiguous ending actually services the film or services the story in some way. This felt like it was incredibly empty after everything we went through with Cameron as a character, and both the past and the present version of him. It really could have felt weird that they would just leave it on sort of like a fade to black or a cut to black, and then it would just all cut to credits, and it just felt very empty to me. Considering the fact that the actual premise is really good, the idea of these creatures that were that were sort of created or generated through actual gadgetry or actual computerization is actually a very interesting idea. Actually gaining life and gaining a sense of awareness is actually rather interesting. But the sad thing is, the ending just kind of makes you think, what were they planning on doing? And it's one of those things where I feel like Charlie Brooker clearly had an idea planned out for what he wanted the scene after Cameron reaches out his hand to one of the police officers and helps him up. He clearly had a scenario thought out where he does show us what would happen if the Thronglets actually became aware, and actually became aware to the point that they could possess humans and actually possess physical matter, flesh and things like that. What would happen, but it kind of fell into cliche territory. So I am quite divided on this episode. Yes, there are good moments, there are good visuals. I like the fact that when he sort of, starts to see all these different, Thronglets, he starts seeing almost like these very technicoloured spectrums of light, where it's almost like, oh, he's like doing drugs, but then at the same time he's staring at a computer screen. I like that effect where he's almost like being taken over by these drugs, but then he's also being taken over by these Thronglets. And I like the Thronglets as actual digitised little, creations. They're very adorable. Like when I saw Lump killing the Thronglets, I got very emotional, and I thought, stop killing you horrible, stop killing these things, you horrible sadist. And I was actually rooting for Cameron to murder Lump at that point, because it was like, oh my god, he's a horrible person for killing these creatures. Yes, they're video game characters, but to his friend, they are literally, people, are just as good as people. And I really do like Peter Capaldi's performance in this when he plays Cameron in the future, because he does play him as almost like a guy who's so detached from reality and from humanity, to the point where he's literally looking at humanity as almost like an extra layer of technology to further expand and further connect to, another wire to connect to the bigger picture of society almost. And I like that idea that he almost has that element to him, where he is almost so detached from humanity that he literally thinks of them in the same degree as we would talk about machines and technology, or your games console, your phone, or whatever it is. I'm glad he kind of almost does that, because it did remind me a bit of a phrase from a David Cronenberg film, fuck Videodrome, long live the new flesh, kind of came to mind whenever I thought about him talking about humanities as if they were bits of technology. I thought that was very interesting, that it almost felt very Cronenberg-esque when he kind of spoke about people in that sort of technological way, that they're just another link in the form of, humanity, almost their form of evolution, that they're another form of evolution, or them taking over humanity literally is another step of evolution for them. And it is actually quite terrifying, because when he has that moment where he's like drawing the thing, and he's like going, I need to focus here, and he's like drawing this thing, it's basically like a barcode. Like when you like say, oh, scan this thing and you can get access to all these different things, that's what he's basically doing with the Thronglets in that final scene, and it really is quite disturbing. And when I kind of found myself thinking about it, I found myself going, I like this episode, but I don't love it. And I found myself kind of thinking, this should be a good idea, and it is a good idea, but part of me feels like that ending, I don't know, I didn't really like that ending, because it didn't give me enough to the point where I found myself going, oh, it justifies an ambiguous ending. Whereas some of the best films and TV shows have ambiguous endings, or have episodes where they have ambiguous endings, and you know where it can pick up from there. But then there are also some cases where that same scenario still applies, but it still has issues with how it kind of bleeds through with the actual idea. So it's very weird to me. I feel that this episode is a good idea, and it feels like, and I know it's going to sound weird to say, but this feels like Charlie Brooker doing a cosmic horror episode, where it's like, let's talk about the fear of the unknown, but let's do it from the point of view of lemmings or Tamagotchis, and let's see where we go from there. And it sounds like a very silly idea, and it works for the most part, but I think that ending, it didn't give me enough to make me think to myself, oh, I should be worried, or I should be happy, or whatever it is. Because part of me feels like the Thronglets were kind of like a metaphor for the fact that they're the answer to all our problems, because humanity has already gone down a bit of a dive, because there's literally there's this entire future system where they basically would swab you and you could be connected to all sorts of other different crimes, no matter how far distant in the past you are, to the point where it's actually kind of terrifying that humanity has gone down this complete dive. And it's almost like, as I'm doing this review, my opinion on the episode is changing as I'm thinking about it. So I'm kind of back and forth on the episode, as it were, because to me, I think this episode is good, but I think there are problems with it. I feel like there is that element of, I wish Charlie Brooker made it more clear what this was, but then part of me feels like I'm thinking about it in the wrong way, I feel like, because to me, it's not about what the Thronglets will do when they take over, but more the question of what's going to happen now that they have. Because to me, humanity is pretty much a shit place in the world of Plaything, where everyone's going crazy, everyone's like experimenting with drugs because they're so desensitized by the lives that they've led that they're literally going out and taking drugs or seeking video games, going to internet porn, all the rest of it. But then they'll just quite happily, do these things, but there's still horrible things going on in this world. Like, even in the future, Cameron is going through this world where literally people can, arrest you for crimes that you've done way back when, no matter how small it is. And it's actually quite twisted. And even the way the police officer, the detective, is interrogating him, people could say it's almost like a good cop, bad cop routine. But part of me feels like he's so corrupt and so quick to anger and so quick to being like the douchebag, detective character, that it does kind of feel like he's commenting on humanity and how much, and even the way Lump behaves in this episode. I know I'm jumping back and forth, but I found myself going, Lump is an arsehole. The way he treats, the Thronglets when he is alone with them, he immediately resorts to killing them. That to me is a very interesting idea, because part of me feels like us as humans are deliberately imperfect. And I feel like this entire episode is meant to be a commentary on what are the Thronglets going to do now that they've taken over humanity. Are they going to make humanity better, or are they going to make humanity worse? And as I say that, I actually have gone from liking this episode to not quite liking this episode to actually liking this episode, because part of me feels like that's actually a very interesting idea, because the question is like, what is going to happen now that they've taken over? It's more the fact of, what are they going to do to us as humans? Are they going to make us better, or are they going to make us worse? But that aspect is still quite terrifying. The idea that we need these creatures, these digitised humans, which are all these digitised life forms, sort of like a carbon copy of human, interaction, to sort of, make humanity better, is quite a terrifying concept, because we should be able to make humanity better just by existing, by, having all the resources that we have, the fact that we have so many historians, so many, people in politics and things like that. We should be able to learn from the past and actually improve our futures. But we always, as is always the case, we always end up making it worse. So I think this episode does present a very interesting cautionary tale the more I think about it, because it is the idea of, what are we going to do now that these things have taken over? Are we going to make humanity better, or are we going to make it worse? And that's something that I really think is quite interesting. And I think the more I think about it, is actually a more well thought out episode than I originally gave it credit for. And it's actually kind of an interesting idea that just as I'm recording this, my thoughts are now starting to really kind of align themselves perfectly to what the episode was trying to say. And it is actually a very thought-provoking episode. But I want to know your thoughts. What did you think of this episode? Did you like it? Did you not like it? And if not, why? And if you did, why? Like, what made you think this episode was good? Or what made you think this episode wasn't as good as the other ones that we've had so far? Or any throughout the entire, 6 seasons that we've had so far? What made this one different to you? I want to know your thoughts. What did you think of the ending more particularly? Because I think this episode does raise a lot of interesting questions, but I didn't want to say that I completely didn't like it, but I didn't want to say that I hated it either, because it is a good episode, but I just think the way it was executed, it would leave a lot to be desired if you are watching this for the very first time. But I want to know your thoughts. What did you think of this episode? Did you like it? Did you not like it? And this has been my episode of my review for Plaything, the 4th episode of Season 7. And I want to know your thoughts. If you like this video, it's been a bit of a mixed video. Sadly, I've had kind of like a mixed opinion on this, but I've gone back. My thought process was kind of in this video almost, where I've been thinking, it's kind of not great, but then there is good ideas there, but then, oh wait, there is good stuff here, because there is actually a very interesting implication the more I think about it. But it's all up to you guys. I mean, what did you guys think? Did you like this episode? Did you not like it? And if you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos, please subscribe for more. I've been Josh with Whims, and take care, bye for now. And stay tuned to my next episode, Season 7, Episode 5, Eulogy. And I'm looking forward to covering that one, excuse me. And I hope you're having a very good day. Take care, bye for now.